When is it correct to just go with your gut when you're bluff catching? That's what I'm going to discuss in this video today. I want to analyze a hand played by Magnus Carlsen, the greatest chess player in the world. He played some high stakes poker on Hustler Casino live stream a couple of nights ago, and he made a just really sick bluff catch. This was in a 4-bet pot where I think a lot of people just wouldn't even consider bluff catching, but he did. And we also get to hear his thought process because he's thinking out loud on the river when he's making a decision. This was just a really entertaining hand from start to finish. I love watching Magnus play poker. Let's jump into the clip.
Mariano has a lot of those.
What'd you say?
Do you run games at your house?
Yeah, all the time.
Really?
In theory.
Sure.
I mean, I don't do anything.
In theory, they're like imaginary
an imaginary world.
Imaginary world, yeah.
With fake money?
Right.
Money involved though.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
illegal to run
VR
poker
money.
games at your house.
It's V-Bucks.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, V-Bucks we run. I got a couple gift cards, bro. I haven't used that.
Whoa, the greens are coming out. Are they the tilted greens or the happy greens? Stay tuned to find out.
I mean, if he was trying to get value out of a good hand, he wouldn't have raised it like that. I think he's got... He's trying to get $100 from all of us with 7 deuce.
You want to play V-Bucks?
Absolutely.
I'll make it easier for you. I'm folding out a turn.
Thanks. You're in turn, by the way. But you already called.
Oh.
Oh, I would have yelled that true if you did it. $700.
Pre-flop and on the flop, Magnus's play is pretty standard. Mariano raised from early position, Magnus 3-bet from the hijack with 3-4 suited. 3-4 suited is going to be a bit looser than a solver would go, but the solver does like to 3-bet low suited connectors, even 5-4 suited. And it's perfectly okay to just expand your pre-flop ranges a little bit outside what the solver is doing, especially if you have a post-flop edge. I've said this in previous videos, and I'll always say this. It's a good idea generally, if you're a winning player, to try to expand your pre-flop ranges a little bit beyond what the pre-flop charts are telling you to do. Because if you don't do that, if you don't consciously try to play a little bit more aggressively than GTO pre-flop, it's more likely that you're going to end up playing too passively pre-flop. So again, if you have a post-flop edge, it's a good idea to expand with some of these hands that are outside of the pre-flop range to correct for that. Because really what a solver is saying, the solver is saying that a hand is not playable, but it's just outside of the playable range, the correct pre-flop range. All that's really saying is that that hand is going to be basically break even, just losing a very minuscule amount of EV in theory to play that hand pre-flop. And so in practice, it's really not a mistake, and I think often it's a good idea. Yes, it is technically exploitable to play looser than you're supposed to pre-flop, but the reality is you pretty much never end up getting exploited, especially in an environment where people don't have HUDs. It's just live poker. No one's going to exploit you. So Magnus goes ahead and 3-bets, and he actually gets a call from the button. And then in the small blind, Nick Austin cold 4-bets with ace-jack offsuit. Now, this is pretty loose. I'm not as big of a fan of this play because I just think Nick should just be folding ace-jack offsuit. It's just too weak of a hand. I think you need ace-queen offsuit minimum here. But again, you know, it's a stream, it's a fun game, so you can't really complain about players playing a bit loose. Magnus decides to call the 4-bet, which I think is totally standard. If you're going to 3-bet this hand, you should be calling a 4-bet, especially when you're very deep. And we go to the flop. Flop is a low king-high board, and Magnus hits bottom pair. Nick c-bets very small, like a 25% pot c-bet, which is pretty standard. Magnus's call on the flop is easy. You can't be folding 5-out pairs in this situation, especially to a really small bet. And so we're going to go to the turn.
We are in overtime. I hope you guys are enjoying the show on this Wednesday evening. We're back at it tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Bart Hansen is playing 10, 20, 40 tomorrow night. And then Friday, of course, our big game. Bart will be commentating on that one. And then on Monday, DGAF and Raver Poker will be in the game for Max Payne. Hoodie Allen in the chat. What's up, Hoodie?
Cheers. To what, though?
To not losing all your money.
Yeah, let's cheers to that.
Thanks for joining us, Eric Peterson. And Josias
No, it wasn't even bad.
Braganza. Hello.
That was bad.
I gotta be honest, that one was tough.
Appreciate your support, Lee French. Get a bet here from Nick. Magnus calling again. Stubborn and sticky.
Turn is an offsuit 9, and this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. Nick decides to barrel again. He goes for a small bet size in the turn. I like the bet here. I think it's very difficult to find enough bluffs in these spots, and a lot of players will underbluff the turn here. You need to be barreling a lot with strong ace high, even turning weak pairs into bluffs on the turn, which a lot of people are not comfortable with doing, and they end up underbluffing the turn here. Although it might not look like it, this is probably one of the weakest possible hands Nick can have, so I think it's perfectly fine to bluff with. And Magnus doesn't really even think about it. He just doesn't hesitate, he just calls. I think Magnus has shown a tendency to be a pretty sticky player. He definitely likes to call. And this call, although his hand looks extremely weak and vulnerable, it's really not that bad unless you think your opponent's under bluffing. I don't think this will be a significantly negative EV call in theory. This is another misconception that a lot of players have. They don't realize how much equity a 5-out pair has when you're in position, especially facing a small bet size. In a 3-bet pot or a 4-bet pot, a solver is not going to fold very many 5-out pairs on the turn unless the board texture is extremely dynamic or something. I think this particular spot in a 4-bet pot, solver will fold this, but it can't be that big of a mistake. So finally, let's go to the river where Magnus faces a really big decision.
Yeah, I like that. Cheers. Nobody losing no money.
That's a good one, Eric.
Go. And
Sorry about you.
no, don't worry.
Magnus with a pair of 4s can beat nothing.
Yeah, my redemption arc is coming. You made him
But we saw earlier on, he considered calling with king high. If Nick bets again here,
crazy good return.
Oh, yeah. I made that in like 5
Hey,
minutes.
dude, that was very close to not being returned.
can Magnus find the call?
One hand away from him.
I have no read on what's going on.
I have no idea.
And I feel like an idiot. I've been trying to figure it out. I'm very confused.
You're going 3 streets, eh? Actually, somehow, I don't believe you at all.
Your instincts are spot
Like,
on.
there aren't a lot of hands. You have ace-king, obviously. There aren't a lot of hands that you would just go 3 streets with there. Like, I have so many of these hands that crush this board. I just don't believe you at all.
It's smart shit.
This is the problem.
The fact that Nick
I'm
just
gonna
got
look really
bluffed
stupid.
Yeah, he's like no.
has to be a factor in this hand.
Like, but I just don't believe you. I don't believe you at all.
Good.
Wow, what a call! What a call!
For Magnus Carlsen.
Okay.
He's locked in after the shot.
Okay.
The shot helped you.
But I got the run it twice back. You got.
Did. See, that was.
Nice call.
This man can only win
No,
with
but
3-4.
seriously. No, but seriously. Yeah.
Everything you say made sense.
He
Which is
did. But it was still.
did you hear this little sucker? Who is this guy?
3-4?
Well,
Kick
I
him
was
out.
very confused.
Sammy,
I could
deal
not.
him
I
out.
could have never been.
Deal him out.
Yeah.
No more
I
Magnus.
had a
Go back to your game.
Nick looks like somebody just kicked his puppy.
Jesus.
Just a really, really sick bluff catch. Again, I love watching Magnus play poker. The offsuit 10 comes on the river. Flush draw misses. Nick again bets small. He bets like less than half pot on the river when he could be jamming for slightly more than pot. And immediately you see Magnus just start to sniff it out. Like he recognizes right away that Nick is not really repping anything. Because what hand would go for 3 streets of value with this small kind of blocker sequence like this? It's just really not that many. Magnus mentions that Nick could have ace-king. Even ace-king is really not a great hand to go for 3 streets of value with on this board because, as Magnus said, he just really crushes this board. And you have to think, like, well, what is ace-king really getting value from? There's not very much. Nick could have aces, and he could go for the sizing with aces. But other than that, it's hard to think of a hand that Nick plays like this. And I would argue that if Nick had aces, he probably would have gone a little bit larger on the flop and the turn to just try to get max value with them. But I think if Nick has a set or if he has a straight, he probably just jams the river here. And so I think it's reasonable for Magnus to be suspicious of this bet size and think that maybe Nick never uses this with value and instead will just bluff cheaply with it. And finally, on another note, I know it's very easy in hindsight when we have the whole cards exposed to make comments like this, but Nick's body language does look very uncomfortable here. He does not look happy to be in the hand. He's very quiet. He's very closed off, and looks like he just kind of wants the hand to be over. I didn't really watch the way that Nick's body language was for the rest of this stream, but I wonder if Magnus is kind of looking into that. I am actually a big believer in live tells, especially when you're playing with less experienced players live. So all of this is lining up to look like a pretty decent spot to bluff catch, but the problem here is that Magnus has 4-3. He has bottom pair, bottom kicker, and he could lose to bluffs. So if you think you're going to be losing to bluffs here, if you think that Nick is ever capable of turning a weak pair into a bluff with this sequence, you obviously don't want to call here. But I think it is pretty counterintuitive to turn a 4 or something like that into a bluff on this board for this sizing sequence. I think it's reasonably safe to assume that's not going to happen. So as long as Magnus thinks that he's beating Nick's bluffs, it should be okay to bluff catch here. So at this point, I want to return to the question that I posed in the beginning. When do you just go with your gut and make a hero call in a situation like this? I think if you're looking at this from a game theory optimal perspective, this is a clear fold. And even if you're looking at it from an exploitative perspective at a population level, which is kind of how I think about the game most of the time, you know, this is a 4-bet pot. There were a lot of raises pre-flop. There are a lot of high cards on the board, and we're facing a triple barrel. This is not going to be a line where people typically overbluff. So if you're just looking at it from that perspective too, it's a clear fold. But again, this is a very unique spot, and I think Magnus does have pretty compelling reasons to deviate from a more standard analysis of this hand and instead go with his gut. And you know what? Every great poker player goes with their gut in situations like these. Every great poker player is capable of looking at a situation and thinking, you know, all of these patterns in this hand normally would point me toward a fold, but there's something about this hand which just seems so different, and my intuition is just screaming at me not to fold. And I'm going to go with my gut and call here. And every great poker player does that. But you know who else does that? Terrible poker players. Terrible poker players go with their gut all the time, and they're wrong. And that's why they're bad at poker, because their intuition is bad. So how do you know if your intuition is actually steering you in the right direction in a case like this? And how do you know if your intuition is more like a broken compass, which is just sabotaging you in situations like these? Well, I would argue that the most important thing here is experience. If you have years of experience playing poker and you're a proven winning player, you can begin to trust your intuition in spots like these. You can gradually give yourself permission to not go by the books and instead go with your gut when you have a really compelling and logical reason to do so. But if you're not experienced and you're not a winning player, then you should not be making plays like these. You should be playing a pretty ABC strategy until you've proven to yourself that you can win and that you do have solid fundamentals. You learn the rules so that you can break them. And I don't know how experienced Magnus is yet in poker, how good he actually is, but I think he's certainly gone through this process in chess. And that's why we see that he's just fearless at the poker table. If you're familiar with my content and my coaching, you know that I'm a very data-driven and scientific poker player, and I have struggled in the past to allow myself to trust my intuition in spots like these. But I've gradually given myself more permission to do it, because what I've realized actually is that if I don't allow myself to make plays like these, I end up carrying them around with me. If you're in Magnus's shoes here and you force yourself to fold, even though your intuition is saying to call, and then you go back and watch that hand later and you see that he was bluffing, I guarantee you're never going to forget about that hand. You're going to carry that hand around with you for years at least. On the other hand, if he calls and he's wrong, it's going to sting, and he might carry that decision around with him for a few days, but it's much easier to move on from. And at least that's how it works in my experience. And so I do think that allowing yourself to make plays like this can have a measurable impact and improve your win rate, but it also just has the psychological benefit of giving you more confidence at the poker table and allowing you to just operate in a more fearless way. And I think that's actually the real benefit of making plays like these. Rather than having your thought process be clouded by fear, you can instead think more clearly in any situation, not just in these big spots. I'm going to add one more really important caveat because I don't want people to watch this video and then just go off and commit to like calling down fifth pair for stacks in their next session. That's not how this works. Spots like these are very rare by definition. And so if you feel like you're making plays like these a lot, like every session, that's a red flag. That shows that you're actually more likely to just be tilting rather than going with your gut in an effective way. But if it's truly just once in a blue moon that you get this type of feeling, I think you should go for it. That's all I got for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel if you want to get more content like this. I really appreciate everyone who watches and supports this channel. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Good luck at the tables.